Good morning. I just want to acknowledge that I'm feeling a little emotional today. You couldn't walk in here today seeing everyone, and I hope you're feeling it with one another as you're seeing one another today. We just don't take this for granted. I hope we never take this for granted again. Just our being able to be here with each other, and the energy, the collegiality that I saw just as you were waiting to get in. Melissa will tell you it was very, very moving to both of us. So it is an honor to be with you. Much like what you saw, that actually was a video op-ed done by the New York Times. I'd love to tell you that I was as intentional with my pronouns, and they did sort of a linguistic style analysis. But the truth behind that was I was entirely unscripted. I joke now that I was sort of the Ted Lasso of politics. I'm not a politician. I'm a doctor and a very ordinary person who really found myself in an extraordinary moment in history. I did not know the governor. I'd like to share with you some backstories of how the improbability of my landing in that spot in that moment. But it was really to their credit. You see a little card I was holding. It was thoughts and notes or things that would happen or serendipities that would happen in a day. But what really, really happened in the end is a relationship developed between us. And I spoke, my kids would say it's just mom. But it was really being a doctor, being a caregiver, as so many of you are, and just relying on that. So I want to take you back in time again to those early days, and I'll share a few behind-the-scenes things. Someday I hope to write about all of this. We're too busy still working to actually write a book yet, but I think there'll be a day where I get to reflect. But I'll share a few of those stories. First of all, I want to tell you about the Not All Heroes Wear Capes. So somewhere in March of 2020, I got a call from Ryan Vessler. He is the owner of the t-shirt and apparel company Homage, that's very popular with young people. And he told me that I was trending. And you have to understand, I'm one of those people who my kids make fun of. I can't work the remote on the TV. At the end, I think I had 55,000 Twitter followers, but I have never once tweeted. So this would have been lost on me. But what he wanted to do was create a t-shirt. It was going to be a Dr. Amy t-shirt to raise money. He said, I just want to do something to make a difference. And he was going to dedicate it to youth homelessness, which is something near and dear to my heart, something I was working on before I met the governor. And I said to him that day, you're going to know me for about a week or two. It was a little bit longer, not much. But before this is over, there are going to be endless heroes you meet. This is going to be a lot more like a relay race where we're each handing the baton to one another. And as you know, the things you saw the governor and I go through, there's not a leader or person in any walk of life, from owning a business to running a school to what you are doing in your communities, that was going to be untouched, that was going to have to figure out things in ways they'd never had. And that's when he came up with that meme, Not All Heroes Wear Capes. And of course, that t-shirt went viral. It went all around the world. It raised hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for youth homelessness. But it became one of the many, many sort of serendipitous memes that we used here in Ohio. So I want you to know, as we did flatten the curve in Ohio, one of the hardest problems, and I remember telling this to the legislature in my very first meeting with them when I was testifying on the budget, when I knock it out of the park in public health, when I do everything right, you don't see it because you don't see what I prevented, and therefore you don't fund it. And actually we had one of the best budgets ever after that session. But that is a travesty, and again, when we did see the numbers that we were predicting, again, that's far too late. I don't want to see that. But it wasn't the orders we could do. The orders were necessary. They were guide rails to help leaders start figuring out. We were doing a playbook that had been written by George W. Bush and his White House post 9/11. But in the end, it had to be the actions of each of us. And I had this image, I remember. One part that I was conscious about was that I did have to empower people to act, that I had to empower each of us to pull one another up on a life raft. And that was the image I had in my mind. Like, what could I say each day? You know, go help the nurse's child so she could do that double shift. I remember talking to kids and reading letters from kids about, because they were baking cookies and dropping them off. Like, that story was a perfect example. But those were the ways we could be empowered. And that's what I imagined, and that's what Ohioans did. In the very first 2 p.m. press conference, it's on the Ohio News Network. So I had to calm myself down because I was not trained to be doing media. But all there was by the end was that little camera lens, like one camera in one room. Eventually we were all sequestered to keep the governor safe. But by the end of it, even though I had said no one's gonna watch this, it's the Ohio News Network, by the end of it, as it went on, I felt all of us on the other side of a blank camera lens. Like, that's what changed. And how rare is it that we all show up in one place together? And that was a moment. I'll take you a little further back. How did I end up working for a governor, being non-political? It turned out, this is a good lesson to think about, I met one of the governor's closest advisors for 1 hour. She was representing him as the Attorney General on a funding board. I worked for the Columbus Foundation, and we were giving away money, and it happened to be on this issue of youth homelessness. 1 hour, I noticed she was an amazingly bright person. And then I never saw her again, so I assumed she must have gone off to run the campaign, his campaign for governor. And then one day I got this call out of the blue, the governor wants to meet with you. And I remember going to my boss saying, is it even okay for me to talk to a governor? Because we're very non-political in the work we do. And I thought, well, I'll just, I'll get a second to plant some seeds. I'll tell him what I think about youth issues and all these health issues. And I went to this meeting. I walked in a room. There were about 5 of his advisors. Everyone stood up. The governor walked in. I'm nervous, like I'm nervous now. And he sits down at a table, and he proceeds to bring out this crumpled brown paper bag, which is his lunch, which Fran packs for him every day, and was on every airplane and everywhere we went. And so very unceremoniously, he said to me, so, where'd you grow up? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your childhood. And there's something so disarming about it that I just, I grew up in Youngstown, and I didn't often talk about my childhood. It was pretty rough. A lot of my background in public health comes from those experiences and being removed at the age of 12 and realizing by just changing schools, your zip code matters more than your genetic code. I had a completely different trajectory than kids that were just as smart and just as nice. So, I learned very early the difference some of those early interventions can make. And I told him all that. I don't know why I told him. I just blah, 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 blah. And at one point I got so excited with my emphatic hand gestures, I grabbed him on the arm and I was trying to tell him something like I would tell a patient. And then I saw the looks in the room and I panicked. And I reprimanded myself out loud. I said, oh my God, don't touch the governor. And then I scurried away on 30th of Rice to the elevators, and I thought, oh my God, they would never want to put me in front of a camera. And half hour later, I got a text that he wanted to meet again. And that began the adventure, which was an amazing first year. We were doing so much. He let me sit in on every budget because, as you know, health, my favorite, I trained in early intervention. Actually, my in my residency at Ohio Department of Health. That was moved under Director Davis, but every health lives everywhere in government. It's in distracted driving at ODOT. It's in commerce and regulations. It's everywhere in OMAS. And so we started kind of solving problems differently, and it was a great year until January of 2020. And it was actually the last day or two of December of 19, I heard a news story, a World Health Organization news story. And it was an epidemiologist who worked for the World Health Organization. And there was just something in her voice that sounded a little bit different, that gave me a feeling like this is something different. Came back to our staff. I asked our team to look into it. We were already planning for this in January. By early February, we did a big tabletop exercise with the entire cabinet. I was watching the press briefings. My husband, a school teacher for 38 years, was listening to the CDC on phone calls with me, and he's like, "It doesn't sound like we've got this." And I'm like, "I don't think we've got this." And I ended up in the White House the last week of February. The stock market crashed for the second time. Calls were coming in from the governor while I was there. I was sitting in a room with Mick Mulvaney, the president's chief of staff, soon to be gone 2 weeks later, the best virologist and epidemiologist in the world. One gentleman, Bob Cadillac, it's in Michael Lewis's book, The Premonition now, has served multiple presidents, had been over at the Japanese Diamond Princess, and the man was just shaking a little bit. And so, my childhood, one of the good assets you get from having a rough childhood is you get really good in a crisis. You get really good at reading clues that other people don't always see. And I just knew this was the moment we were at the launching point. And they went around the room and gave their best epidemiology and virology advice, and it got to me, and pretty much everything had been said. And I said to Mick Mulvaney, I think you need to tell the president this is the higher angels moment. This is the FDR, Winston Churchill moment in time. We are at war. But the whole world is at war. I used to teach in my intro to global public health classes at OSU that if only we had aliens invading from outer space, we'd finally figure out that we were all on the same team. And as awful as this was, we were all on the same team. And we are all on the same team. And, I got on an airplane. I flew back to Cleveland Metro Health. The governor and I came out to do a press briefing, and we made a simple promise. We didn't have the answers either yet, but we said we'll tell you the truth as we know it. And that's what you saw us doing in those press briefings. Every day we were learning new things, and all we could do was try to share that with you, especially as leaders in every walk of life and work, so that you could start making the decisions you needed to make. There's so many more stories I could tell you about behind the scenes, but I want you to know that every decision we were making was so hard got. We were right there on that camera at Metro Health, driving back in the car. We were on the phone with Columbus. The Arnold Classic was about to happen. 80 countries, 250,000 spectators. And we knew that mass gatherings were the biggest spread going on. We were watching. I'd heard that at Biogen in Boston, 2 people walked in and 70 ambulances left hotels. So we were right on that cusp, and we made the hard decisions. That's a $50 million event to the economy, and we scaled it back. Every single decision we made got the best minds we could around the table. We were making it based on a playbook by George W. Bush. So right after 9/11, George W. Bush read John Barry's book, The Great Influenza. I've gotten to know John Barry very well now. He's writing another book. But what they realized in Homeland Security was that the gravest security risk to this country is a pandemic or a biologic weapon. And it's not just a disease, which has been awful in every way, and we're still dealing with it. But it unmoors us. It unmoors society. It undid global supply chains. Not only did we not have masks, cotton tips, the little layer that you do in a 3M mask, the machines to make that aren't in this country anymore. We didn't have amoxicillin. But it was the unmooring of people, the unmooring of how we see our lives, and bad actors take advantage of that. And that's exactly what we've seen. There's these cascading consequences. And at the same time, I'm going to tell you that right when things are unmoored is the time that people do great things, and they see things differently. So it's also an unveiling and unmasking of things that have always been here. I used to say, if this was only Ghostbusters and you could throw some green dye and have little blobs like floating around of this thing, but everything we were learning, it's asymptomatic spread. It's like you can't point at it. Made it all so hard. But this playbook had been passed from president to president. You never want to throttle back like we did. We've never had to do it at this extreme. But these are the last minute things you do to save lives. And then we were already in March of 2020 making plans for how you back out of it. We didn't have data. At Ohio Department of Health, we don't have the kind of data analysts that got those great numbers. But we ended up going to every university and the hospitals. We reached across all industries. The Cleveland Clinic had people, we called them the Force. They went in a room and they started crunching numbers. And that's how Ohio got ahead. The second we told the truth, many of the scientists had gone underground. From around the world, they started calling us. Listen to this serendipity. I hired a communications director 4 days before you first started to get to know me. At one point, she said to me, you know, my brother, he's a doctor who went to your med school. He knows a little bit about wastewater and measuring viruses. And I come to find out that he worked in George W. Bush's White House and helped write the pandemic playbook. I'm like, I think I'd like to talk to him. Next thing I knew, he introduced me to Carter Mecker. Again, this has all been written about extensively now, but none of it was known at the time. They were part of something called Red Dawn, and they're like trying to get the information to the governors because this was supposed to be run federally. And I had them on the phone. We were getting the best information from the best people, and that's how we did it. So that telling the truth as a leader, you know, my childhood was about, you know, I can do anything as long as you put those cards on the table for me. Then I can start bringing the right people around the table to solve problems. And that's what we did in Ohio, stopping an election. We postponed an election. We kept trying to keep that election going. Oh my God, elderly were at risk, so we had to not have them work the polls. Well, maybe teachers who are now off could work the polls. We were doing all these things, but in the end, it became a person's right to vote or their safety and their health. So we can postpone that primary and make it, those are impossible decisions. We made the right one, I feel, because we watched how it went in other states. So every one of these things were hard got, they were made by people together, and then moving out of it, we have to be very smart as well. So, brutal honesty. Secondly, vulnerability. First of all, you know, I can't tell you enough what Ohioans were doing for one another. Yes, there was incredible hate. There were January 6th people in my front yard. I live in an ordinary house in a very ordinary neighborhood. I said I'm married to a teacher who was home trying to teach during the pandemic. We had little Home Alone skits we were going through in our head, like maybe if we put the sprinklers on, just happen to pop on. And no, you can't do that. And there were so many people. Again, people were out, businesses were out. You know, people genuinely had things to protest and talk about. But once you bring gigantic machine guns, I couldn't go out in the crowd and ask them what's going on, which is my number one instinct was go out in my front yard and ask. But it turned out many of the same characters were the people that we're hearing about now at January 6th. So they were sent there. There were tweets that said, activate and liberate. But that was true, the anti-Semitic stuff was true. I had Christmas decorations still up because I'd been so busy I hadn't taken them down. I'm Jewish, my husband's Episcopal. We celebrate both holidays. I'm like, did you notice? But, you know, all of that was true, but I am here to tell you that we have mailrooms at Ohio Department of Health and the governor that are as big as this room. And you literally could not walk through them for what Ohioans were making and sending. Ohioans were making art. They were trying to make meaning out of things. They were helping one another. They were decorating bridges. Things were going up in people's yards. I said 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon spread, and there is a giant 6-foot bacon statue in a corporate park in Cincinnati. One day I said something, again, unscripted. I watched Colbert and Michael Stipe was on, and he sang this song you might want to hear. It's called There's No Time for Love Like Now. I got a call from Michael Stipe. But he had gotten COVID. Someone in his family had gotten really sick, and he wanted to know how he could help. There was Bonnie Bowen. There was a fan club that got started. And there was a woman in her 90s, Bonnie Bowen, who started doing watercolors every day. Day 1 of the pandemic, 2, 3, 4. They were very whimsical. She went into the hundreds and hundreds. She got COVID. She got over 250,000 prayer messages sent her way. And she survived. So her kindness, her helping, helped other people get through, and then we helped her get through. Right? Someone made a sign, act on love, not hate. And so we started to say that there's a contagion. That's my last name, Acton, act on. I would never think of that. And so they started popping up these yard signs, and we started to say, there's a contagion worse than the virus, and it's fear. And, so we started to say, act on love, not hate, act on kindness, not fear. Kindness is not niceness, folks. As we watched all these social movements unfold, kindness is not stabbing yourself in the back and just pretending. Kindness is an age-old, enduring principle in every religion and every mythology. It's about the God in me greeting the God in you and recognizing your humanity. It's about having the hard conversations, but making space for them. It's scientifically proven to help your health and help one another. And that's what I saw in Ohioans. And I realized that just like herd immunity, you never get everyone vaccinated. Not everyone can get vaccinated. But you just need enough people. And if enough of us do the right thing most of the time, all of us get through. And that's what we're living in. We have to be vulnerable. People are still suffering. They're still trying to make meaning. They're still deeply unmoored. I'm here to tell you that there's no business we're all trying to function, but we all know it's not functioning quite right. And I know in your field, you lifted mountains for the most vulnerable people in our state. And you're still doing it. And not everyone knows you're still doing it, but I know you're still doing it. But if we can keep creating that space together, enough of us do the right thing, we will all get through. So finally, I want to leave a lot of time for questions, but empowerment. I need to tell you that I did get asked to run for U.S. Senate not long after. I've had so many experiences happen to me since this. And I realized, and I'm finding my own way, I'm not a very partisan person, but every one of us is being called to act. Every one of us doesn't know when we'll be facing a situation when we just can't look the other way. It will grab you. I did not know what I would do in an emergency. Would I have the courage? I can tell you that once you have 11.7 million patients and you fall in love with Ohioans, I don't know if it was courage. I didn't want anyone to die. I wanted every one of us to get to the other side. But every one of us is faced with these moments, big and small, in our lives, when all of a sudden, I'd like to go over here, I'd like to not know, but I know. We have to co-create our world over and over again with every generation. This has been studied by a bipartisan group. The Academy of Arts and Sciences put out a book called Common Ground. We have to keep creating this, and it can go either way. That is the world we face and becoming the world we want to live in. I can tell you that I see so many people moving in that direction right now. Things are falling apart, but when they are disrupted, I'm here to tell you, I used to tell my students, dare to scheme. This, in the midst of disruption, is often the most fertile ground to change things. There were so many things in the pandemic, like I would hit my head against the wall every time, but all of a sudden, doors fell open. And if you really look around right now, there's a lot of room for movement and change. But you got to grab a few people, make sure you have all the right people around the table with you, and go for it. We are going to someday stop and look back at this. We are going to have to mourn all we have gone through. It will dawn on us what we have gone through, just like 9/11. We will memorialize this, and we'll make meaning out of it. But together, we're the ones who will make that meaning. So I look forward to many, many more times with you, working side by side with you, because I, again, am an ordinary person working alongside you every day. It's been such an honor to serve this state, and I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Amy Acton. When you were in, and when you and Jeff Davis worked together, you made sure that adults and children with IDD were first prioritized in the 1A and 1B category. We truly appreciate you putting these individuals first, because it really helped save lives for our folks.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah, I'll try this one. Thank you. It's the work we all did together, and you know it. And again, that was one of the, one by one, like I said, this virus was your worst science fiction nemesis. And instantly it was like, who's our most vulnerable? And often it was in congregate settings, nursing homes, prisons, daycare centers, places that people are. And again, unspeakable, but we got the best information we could, and it was you who were doing this day in and day out. And again, I can't thank you enough for your bravery on the front lines. I know we're all a little traumatized by this. It's very hard. People don't recognize that in March, you don't want to throw those breaks and do this to a society. But we did not know how to treat this virus. It was the worst thing. As a doctor, I have so many doctors and nurses telling me, and if you were bedside during this time, you would put someone on a ventilator and you still couldn't get oxygen in them. It is a horrible kind of death. It's a horrible thing to be beside someone going through that. The mortality rate, I've heard all different numbers, but it was at least 25% if you were in the hospital. By June, it was down to 5%. So we were buying time to figure out what to do. And the heroism, like I said, that baton passing, so many heroes. Everyday ordinary heroes. And so thank you for what you did.
God bless you, Dr. Acton. I wanted to ask you, what would be a key point that you would use to define connection? We often hear that word connection, you got to make a connection, but what would you define?
Oh, well, do not underestimate the power of this. It's so funny because our Surgeon General did a book about together the power of connection in our world, and he believes that all the modern epidemics of our society, the diseases of despair that we are all fighting, have at their root loneliness. We are social animals, we're wired, and I'm a slightly introvert, believe it or not, who did not love public speaking. But we're wired to each other this way. And so connection is healing. We have to be intentional about it. It is an antidote Medicines are helpful, but I'm here to tell you in public health, we gained 30 years life expectancy in the last century. From 1900, when my grandfather was born, you're expected to live to 48 on average. He lived to 84. We gained 30 years on average. Only 5 of it was due to most of the high-tech, expensive stuff I learned in med school. 25 years was due to things that we can only solve collectively. It's clean water, safe food, child labor laws, how we help people live longer with disabilities. All of these things, I could go on, maybe a little vaccine, maybe a little penicillin, the simple things, but by and large, our life expectancy is from things we solve together as communities by creating the conditions to have a healthy life. And it can go backwards as we're learning, as our life expectancy is. This might be the first generation that doesn't live as long a life as their parents did, on average. And we know the disparities of that. That your zip code, you know, I've worked in Rwanda post-genocide, and the infant mortality rate was lower there than it was in Wyland Park, a block from where I was teaching at OSU. And how'd they solve it post-genocide was with community health workers and really basic things that don't cost a lot of money, but people that can connect with you and know what you're going through and come and meet you where you're at. So we've got to think about things differently. And I told you, it's so hard. My field is so hard because when we do it right, you don't see it because we're trying to prevent it. But we've got to get wiser coming out of this. And that's what I'm saying. As much as this is painful, these disparities have been here all along. All of us know it. It just revealed them. It unmasked a lot into more consciousness. So it's also an opportunity if we can navigate the hate, and that hate is real and the rhetoric is real, but most of us hold dear a lot of things in common, and we can go after those right now.
Hello, Dr. Amy. I just want to say that throughout the pandemic, we heard a lot of numbers that went up, down, and all over the place, unfortunately. But I want to let you know that we do have stories now. I have published a blog with people from University of, from Boston University and an advocacy group in Massachusetts and an advocate in New York. We have published stories and interviewed stories by people with disabilities. It's still a work in progress, but if you Google my name, if you can remember it. So, I can't talk much about it, but these stories are eye-opening, though, from true people who have survived the pandemic, who have lived the pandemic in group home settings. And this concept was much needed because we needed to hear from people with disabilities. The early reports that were entailed were by parents and professionals, which all the professionals in this room are excellent, by the way. But I just wanted to enforce that we didn't know how, we only knew what we knew from family and friends. And I think from the power of healthcare and understanding different religion types and culture types and diversity types, that we have been stronger than ever. And I want to thank you for all you have done. I really enjoy watching you.
Thank you. Diana. If I could just say, Diana, I think that is so important, part of our healing from this, StoryCorps kinds of concepts are so important. Again, that's why I'm just so excited to be here, and I'll stay after to talk with anyone who wants to talk, as long as you want to tell me a story, because we've got to capture these, though. We've got to capture them now. And, you know, we have not done the postmortem you're supposed to do. There are many people fighting around the country for a 9/11 style commission to really look at this. We've got to learn from it. We didn't do it all perfectly. We could do better. We need to learn. We need to make meaning out of it, memorialize it, and that's how we'll move on. So those stories are priceless, and we've got to make it real through them. So whatever you've witnessed, capture it.
Oh, hi, Dr. Acton.
Hi.
I'm right in front of you. I don't need to use the mic to talk to you, but so that everyone else can hear. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is
too.
Nathan Turner. I work for the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities about 3 weeks. It's weird to say in such a public setting. My question to you is, yeah, it's been an emotional month. I won't get into that. But my question to you is, how did you and the governor work to address the social determinants of health and manage the information gap in communities of color and underserved communities and BIPOC communities when it came to things like providing accessible information and encouraging them to take the vaccine?
That's right. Thank you for that question. So, you know, I am the tip of the iceberg. You need to know that there are 1,100 people that work at Ohio Department of Health. I don't know the numbers in Director Davis's department at the time. 118 local health departments. Every one of us in multiple cabinets, multiple fields of discipline, but knowing so much about getting information out. You know, we tried some new things. We got out in neighborhoods. I mean, homeless folks were in a really difficult position and how to get information. And I really do believe that leading in a human-centric design kind of way, people that are experiencing things know best how to explain things and get information to one another. And so I saw all over the state, and again, these are things we'll have to capture. I've been after our local health departments, please capture like what worked, what didn't work. But it was trying to get out, again, into neighborhoods, in getting to people. There were incentives that were done to help make it easier. There are people who are arguing, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm hearing it was a good thing, it worked. So we've got to capture all the methodologies that we made up together, ones that we have studied and learned from, use those. But I think people right in this room probably discovered new ways of doing things that they've never tried before. So it's very important that we capture that. Again, it's hard for me. I don't even get to hit the pause button either to sort of, I have a whole bedroom full of stuff. I'm like, just put it in there. I'll get to it someday and make sense out of it. But to the extent we can as a field and through your organization, figure out what worked.
Absolutely. Thank you.
But begin by being intentional to know it needs done.
Hi, good morning. Hey, Dr. Acton. I'm Dr. Lora Sorg, the Medical Director at Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. So thank you so much for everything that you've done. And for those that don't know, we just overlapped by a few days because I got the random phone call from Director Davis, again, by way of Dr. Mary Applegate, and just a few days later is when you had that transition. So thank you for everything that you have done. I am trying not to tear up. I'm just a farm girl from Butler County, Ohio, right? And the autism mom of a 11-year-old. So I still practice in primary care. And so that was still the bulk of my work during the pandemic. But the thing that I am trying not to tear up of is there's a lot of PTSD in this room. I can't imagine the PTSD that you went through, and so this might feel a little bit of like a personal question, but I look around at all these people that did an amazing job, that when we, pled with folks, when we had regular meetings, I'm sure Adam and everybody at OACB was tired of hearing about the stats, even though, again, they did a tremendous job, tired of me saying the stats each week. My question for you is, with the PTSD and secondary PTSD, that a lot of individuals in this room probably may have felt, what do you feel like is the thing that might be the best thing that they could do? You know I'm going to say therapy. You know I'm going to say go see their family doctor. But what would you say has been important for you with potentially dealing with that PTSD or secondary PTSD?
Thank you. So first of all, welcome. And the state is so lucky to have you. Again, these are hard jobs, right? We all know these are hard jobs. And it's a real service. So I've fallen in love with public servants, period. Going behind the veil myself now. So PTSD, I felt it. Again, I see it in your eyes. I see it everywhere I go. You might be the CEO of Huntington Bank, and I see it in your eyes. And stuff's not working right. And your employees are suffering still. That acknowledge piece, which the New York Times picked out, again, I'd love to say I was intentionally doing that. It's instinctual for me for some reason, but we first have to acknowledge. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard right now because I'm learning so much about politics now, observing it, because I'd never really seen underneath it. I mean, so many people in politics really want to do the right thing, but I wasn't kidding about this. This is a different era we're in, and you need narratives. We need leaders talking us through this part. One of the things I would say in a 9/11 style commission is we had the pandemic throttled down. We didn't have the what do you do for the next 2 to 3 year playbook, which is still, it's another phase of the pandemic we're in. It's still going on. And so we need leaders, and whatever leadership you're in now, I think one of the best things you could do to help everyone around you is to acknowledge that we're in a stage and just put some of these things out there honestly, vulnerably, not, falling apart like I almost did walking up there, but, be there in a very determined way to hold space and lay it out there, because we need those narratives to make meaning out of things. And I really do believe, and again, I've had the privilege now of just talking to many people around the country, people that work with the president, and that was my advice to them as well. Talk us through this period. The blessing of us all showing up at 2 p.m. was we kind of could all have a space to acknowledge. And we do need leaders using storytelling and just making meaning out of this stage. So if you can do that in whatever walk of life you're in, I think that will help. Trauma, I read a lot about it. Obviously, again, trauma, it never goes away completely. And anyone who has experienced that, and most of us experience something in one way or another in our lives, it's also a source of strength. That helps me. But it's also just learning about how it's affecting your behavior. So there's so many great books out there. I know, like literally Oprah and a psychiatrist put a book out, What Have You Been Through, or something. It's the questions we can ask of each other that's really helpful. Like, what are you going through? What have you been through? Those are the kinds of things that help us all deal with it. But this is also, again, collective trauma means a collective experience of humanity, which means, what do we want to make of that? How are we going to make meaning of that? Generations before us have gone through so much, and they will go through things after us. What is this generation going to do? And as much as everyone's worried about our young people, I'm already seeing signs that they see things differently. And they have deeply held convictions. And that's not a bad thing for humanity. So that's how I'm coping with it. And believe me, I have good days and bad, and the ones where I can't get out of bed, my husband's like, honey, just start again tomorrow. So many things. When I said, I'm not afraid, I'm determined, teacher, coach, husband, walking out the door, going, you're not afraid, you're determined. Yeah, you're right. And that's what I said to you. There's so many serendipities, but these are the ways we're going to help each other get through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sorry.
Thank you. I sat in front so I could fangirl appropriately. Everyone in this room has seen our direct support professionals just go above and beyond. They were our heroes during that time. and we're seeing so many people leaving the healthcare field in general, but obviously we specifically are dealing with the workforce shortage with the people that care for the people we support. So I guess I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how we hold it together during this time of shortages, but also thoughts on what we can do as Ohioans to get more people into healthcare in general and caregiving specifically.
So I've been thinking, no, that's okay, and I don't have all the answers, but I'll tell you what I was thinking about because I was pondering this for you. And this shortage is everywhere, but I can't imagine how difficult it is. So I'm imagining that everyone's carrying the load of multiple people right now. So first of all, you've got to help each other get through this phase. Adam, I'm very impressed with you as a leader. I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think as a collective body, we're going to have to get the young people in here. There are people that are going to be passionate about this field. It takes very special heart to be caregivers, but they're out there. I'm telling you, these young people are out there. Maybe there are ways we can make it easier for them to get past the barriers. We might have to do some things collectively to loosen getting people in who want to be in here and help during this time. That's one thought I would have, like, collectively. You are going to have to spread the story of why you're in this. Why are you doing this? I just met somebody today she's retiring. Where are 40 years? And again, I don't know if I could do what you do every day. You know, but something is in each of you that gives you just the right thing that makes you do what you're doing. And we've got to find that. We've got to find the next generation of people. And you've got to share what you're doing. And now that goes back to what Diana said, which is the stories. You know, one of the things I'm working on now is this new initiative to get us, one of the healing things I think that came out of this is we all discovered nature, the healing power of nature. It's not partisan. We're getting supply chain back, which is a great thing for the state. And I realize there are other things, like we discovered that. So I'm trying to really work hard on creating access to healing for every neighborhood, putting nature at everyone's doorstep. But one of the biggest things we're going to be doing, I was reached out to by Pete Edwards, who does adaptive sports. He's like, what can we do to make every ounce of this new system, the largest system in the country, accessible? And I'm like, yep, this is a way we can do it. So I know you're all sitting on projects, big and small, that you're doing. I can't say enough narrative. Tell stories. If there's, again, I'm an ordinary person, but I just wasn't spin trained, I guess. And I told your stories. I read letters out loud of what you were doing. Maybe the secret is in telling the story of what you're doing and what you're enduring, honestly. And there'll be some relief in it for each other, but also make maybe the larger world more aware of what you're going through. And all of us in a position to be advocates, we should scheme.
All right, we have time for one more question, and it's going to be in the center of the room.
Hello. Thank you for coming here today to talk to us. So I have many individuals that I'm working with right now that have significant medical needs, and we're really struggling with the nursing shortage. I have many people that need nurses basically yesterday, and we just cannot find any. And I'm sure it's true for other counties as well. Yes. Are you in Ohio working on anything to solve the nursing crisis that we have right now?
I do go around the state a little bit with my work, so I am seeing this everywhere. Again, we have, for those of you who aren't politically minded, I mean, I thought I knew what was going on in the world. I read the news, I watched, I paid what I thought was attention, but I'd never gone behind the curtain. This is a really good time to get involved. It gets a little crazy at the State House. I would say that most people don't pay attention. We pay attention to the big name races, But and when I walked through those doors of the State House as a Ted Lasso, no kidding, like, yes, let's help Ohio. We have some of the worst health economies. Let's go. But with all the energy and enthusiasm, but not a lot of understanding of everyone's roles and how it works. This is a really important time to pay attention to your state and local and learn and join whatever it is your beliefs are, and join your professional organization and get busy, because that's how things happen. It really is. And if we don't show up, our voices won't get heard. And you are representing a field where people's voices don't get heard. People get marginalized. I always felt, again, I'm not superhuman. I didn't know what would come out of my mouth half the days I was doing it, but my heart and soul, I know, were aligned with what I wanted to do. I care. So learn how to use your voice, learn how to connect and collectively use your voices right now. No, this is how things happen in the world. And we can't afford to look the other way, and I know we're exhausted. And I know it's confusing what they do. It's still, I'm spending all my time trying to understand still. But find out and use your voices. There are many, many, many good public servants out there. And if you don't like what you're seeing, maybe it's time to become one.